The big federal tax and spending cut bill is law. The Trump administration halts education funds, plus the Braun administration's DEI elimination report, and more. From the television studios at WFYI, it's Indiana Week in Review for the week ending July 11th, 2025.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.
Faith leaders held a funeral service recently for those they say are marked for death by the federal tax and spending cut bill. The service was meant to stand for the hundreds of thousands of Hoosiers who will lose access to health care and food benefits because of the measure. Joel Rickenbaugh is a minister at Trinity Church in Indianapolis. He's part of Live Free Indiana, which organized the protest.
We grieve for those who will die simply because poverty was thrust upon them in the richest nation on earth. And we rage because it didn't have to be this way.
Faith leaders gathered beside a hearse outside U.S. Senator Todd Young's Indianapolis office. They chastised Young and other Republicans who voted for the bill, and some clergy, like Pastor Sarah Lund from Indianapolis, prayed over an empty casket.
Oh God, you call us all to care for the poor, the elderly, and the disabled. We confess that we have sinned as a nation, and our leaders have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed. We have worshiped the twin evils of greed and hatred.
In a statement supporting the federal legislation, Senator Young called it a strong bill that will benefit Hoosier families and increase the security and prosperity of all Americans. Does this bill adequately balance tax relief with the impact of its spending cuts? It's the first question for our Indiana Week in Review panel. Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Mike O'Brien, Ebony Chappel, Market Director for Free Press Indiana, and Niki Kelly, Editor-in-Chief of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. I'm Indiana Public Broadcasting State House Bureau Chief Brandon Smith. Lara, will this bill have an overall positive impact for Hoosiers?
No, it won't. I mean, can I just say that and be done with my statement? No, it's not going to at all. In fact, I think what we're seeing here, just first of all, stepping away and looking at it at a macro level, we are seeing the greatest transfer of wealth from the poor to the very, very rich in our nation's history. And this is unprecedented, and it will undoubtedly have a number of negative effects on Hoosiers. I mean, we're already looking at the future Medicaid cuts and the concerns and that it cuts health care. There's also been discussions about how this could penalize rural communities. I think it was like 12 rural hospitals could potentially be on the chopping block to be closed. But the other thing that it's doing, which I think really hasn't had much of a conversation about it, is that we are essentially mortgaging our kids' future with this. I mean, we are just tying like a anchor around their neck. Because it's going to add trillions of dollars to the deficit. And I just think it's unconscionable in that way. And what's really disappointing is that there are Republicans who are deficit hawks, and yet this still was able to get through. Now, the challenge for Democrats is going to be, as it always is for us, is are we going to be able to maintain the focus to message this as efficiently and as effectively we can? Because a lot of this is going to be great. It's going to come in gradually, right? So it's really going to be incumbent upon us not to chase whatever social issue of the day and to really hone in on this economic message. I think I think the economic message works for us, but we have to have the discipline to stick with it and go with it.
What are people going to notice more? The dollars they have a little bit more in their paychecks, or hospitals closing, if that's what comes out of this?
Well, first of all, look, I mean, this is always the debate. You can't touch Medicaid because the disabled kids were putting them in a coffin at a press conference, right? I mean, that's not what anyone's talking about. Most of the changes in that Medicaid bill are requiring guys who look like me, who are on Medicaid, to go get a job and work 80 hours a week. We're not making the disabled kid go to work. We're not making the grandma who's eligible for Medicare and Medicaid go get a job. But these programs are engulfing all the other programs. And so particularly for Democrats, if you're for K-12 education and pre-K and DCS funding and all these other things that are priorities for Democrats, the biggest risk to that is Medicaid growth. And so the program, the debate, I mean, separate tax cuts and Medicaid cuts because they're separate. Medicaid needs reform. It needed reform. If there was nothing else in that bill, that language should have been there. And it should have been there because, again, it's engulfing every other priority, because we've decided that everyone gets health care for free. And it's removed the priority from that program from where it started, which was disabled kids and pregnant moms and the elderly who need help. And we've expanded this thing well beyond what it was ever intended. And now we're feeling the budget impact of it. We've debated this time and time again in the context of the State House. Yeah. Because we have the budget guys who are not looking at this going, we're 5 years out from not being able to pay for anything other than Medicaid. And that's the problem. And we've got to change what this is trying to do is reverse course from where we were heading. And that was, again, guys like me who should be working aren't.
But the middle of that changing course is going to be a little rocky for folks who might just outright lose their health care coverage with potentially no place affordable to turn. Mm-hmm. And that impacts more than just those people who lose their health care coverage, right?
It does impact more than just those people who lose their health care. So I wanted to point out, you're speaking about guys like you who should just go get a job. There are guys who look just like you who need Medicaid. Yeah. They need health care. Health care costs in this country are astronomical. And there are people who, despite their best efforts, going to work every day, squirreling away what they can, are still negatively impacted by this. Right here in the state of Indiana, we can charge interest on medical debt, even though it is to the discretion of the judge who's seeing that. More often than not, they're going to add that poverty tax on top of people. So we have so many people that are suffering. Laura mentioned the Medicaid with the rural hospitals. You have these rural communities where they may only have that one facility. That facility is now under fire, maybe possibly not going to exist. So what are people supposed to do? Maybe people that look exactly like you who do have jobs, but now don't have a place to go and get their health care. The White House is positioning this bill as a reconciliation. I think for people who are trying to survive using SNAP benefits, using Medicaid, even the people who are going to get a little bit on their paychecks, supposedly, this feels more like a wrecking ball than reconciliation, in my opinion.
It's more than a year until the midterms, but is this the sort of thing that could dramatically impact the control of Congress?
Well, some of this, though, doesn't even go into effect until after midterms. Yeah. So if some of the SNAP...
done.
Yeah.
How about that?
Isn't it? Wow.
You know, some of the things that makes the state have to pay for some of the SNAP benefits. And these are also, and you mentioned, you know, Medicaid is for disabled people and elderly. That's not, it's always been for poor people.
Yeah.
And like we said, there are some of these poor people who are working. You can work 40 hours a week in this country and still not have health care. It you know, happens all the time. And for those hospitals...
Or your company keeps you at a little less than 40 hours to make sure you can't get health care.
Yeah. And for those people who, regardless, let's say you're working hard and you get sick, you go to the ER, those ERs, they have to treat you, period. Yeah. They can't turn you away. But now they don't even get Medicaid to help cover the costs. Yeah. So it's coming to us.
Yeah.
We've gone from the war on poverty, we've gone from, you know, the war on poverty to a war on the poor. I mean, that's how it feels.
All right, time now for viewer feedback. Each week we pose an unscientific online poll question. And this week's question is, do you support the big federal tax and spending cut bill? A, yes, or B, no. A couple of weeks ago, we asked you whether Indiana colleges and universities should eliminate degree programs that don't produce enough diplomas. Just 20% of you say yes, 80% say no. If you'd like to take part in the poll, go to WFYI.org/IWIR and look for the poll. Well, the Trump administration told states recently that it won't be dispersing nearly $7 billion in federal education grants. The money would normally go to a wide range of school programs, such as migrant education, resources for English language learners, and before and after school learning. NPR reports that the U.S. Education Department typically disperses that funding by July 1st. Indiana expected to receive roughly $107 million in federal funding that is on hold. The Indiana Department of Education shared what the federal department said about the funds currently on hold in a weekly newsletter. It did not answer specific questions from WFYI about the funding freeze. IDOE will tell schools as we know more about these allocations. Mike O'Brien, what kind of impact, I'm talking about impact this week, what kind of impact could this funding freeze have on students and schools?
Well, in Indiana, put it in context with the changes in property tax. We're a little unique, probably in the country, in that we've overhauled property taxes, certainly the way we did it.
Yeah.
So locals are still sorting that out. Local governments are still going to have to figure out if they're raising local income taxes. The good news is this isn't a lot of money. It fulfills a long-time goal of Republicans, anyway, to start scaling back the degree to which the federal government supports local schools and make that a state-focused problem, issue to solve. And so the impact's going to be minimal because the education budget is half the actual budget. And locals are having to figure out what the impact is on schools and local government with property tax reform in general. And in that context, we've changed the incentive from locals not having a stake in growing their economies and growing their assessed value and increasing property taxes to support all those services. So we're in the middle of what is a pretty seismic shift, I think, in Indiana on that. This probably doesn't help in this moment because we're in the middle of a pretty significant shift in how we're funding a lot of these local programs. But I don't think it's going to be minimal just because the pie is so big.
Is timing the biggest concern for schools, that this is coming on the heels of and in the middle of this property tax shift?
Well, I think the property tax shift is, you look at Senate Bill 1 and you see just the repercussions on local units of government. And I think the superintendents and the public schools really raised the red flag about how they were going to be negatively impacted. The challenge is you've got all of these programs that are going to be hit, and it is, July 11th and school starts in Indiana, and most communities July 24th. So if you are running an after-school program in one of the many places in Indiana that have after-school programs that are funded by this, the question is that may be the only after-school program in Steuben County or Huntington County or in Milan, Indiana. So the challenge is you are putting them, who, by the way, are Trump voters, into a terrible position in trying to figure out how you're going to have childcare, after-school care for kids, as well as some of the other programming that these schools offer. And I think, again, it's like been this just war on education. I understand that, the Republicans in the legislature, think they know how to sort of manage it over the years and haven't done a terrific job. But Senate Bill 1 and this local shift, as you call it, it's going to cause a massive issue within these school districts, and you're giving them 2 weeks to figure out how they're going to fund essential programming that people rely on. People can't quit a job because Medicaid's not going to be there for them. People can't quit a job and not have a place for their kids to go after school.
There's also a difference in the conversation between the last topic and this one, in that was legislation debated by Congress, voted by Congress after thorough debate. This is money appropriated by Congress that the executive branch is just unilaterally going, nah. Is that the bigger issue?
I think when it comes to schools, I'm not sure they particularly care how it's happening or the mechanics behind the decision. What they know is that's $100 million, and yes, maybe per individual school it's not a massive amount, but it's still $100 million they were using for programs. Several of the programs that will be impacted are English language learners and migrant help. Obviously, we're trying to discourage, as a federal government, any movement that encourages immigrants here. And so, but like hospitals in the last segment, schools, if a kid shows up and can't, speak English, they still have to educate that child by law. So they still need, money to help them do that.
This is one, like we just talked about with the big federal bill. The impacts of that are going to, in some cases, it's going to take a little time to really see the impacts. This one, it feels like you might see any impact a lot sooner.
Absolutely. So to the point about timing that was made, the education organizations that were supposed to receive this funding found out the day before they were supposed to receive it that they weren't going to receive it. Yeah. That, to me, feels like just another impulsive attack on the social safety net. In addition to the things that Niki just mentioned, that it's covering supporting immigrant families, migrants learning English. You also have adult literacy that's impacted. You also have programs designed to enrich the effectiveness of teachers. So for me, I think we are going to see the impacts immediately, and I'm just worried about the impulsivity of it. I do have a quote. A spokesperson for the Office of Management and Budget said that the initial findings showed that these programs subsidize a radical left-wing agenda. I think that gets to the crux of what this is all about, the impulsivity behind it. the disregard for how it's going to impact educators and students overall. Just focus on this radical left-wing agenda that they are so frightened by.
All right. Diversity has been removed from the state's employer values. That, a direct quote, is one of many changes the Braun administration is implementing across Indiana state government to eliminate statements, policies, and programs referencing diversity, equity, and inclusion. The governor's office released a report this week that follows up on an executive order issued early this year. The 135-page report includes identifying references to the words diversity, equity, and inclusion in archived meeting minutes, changing language in employee handbooks and mission statements, and eliminating positions and programs. Some examples include working to remove a continuing education requirement for real estate brokers on fair housing laws and listing agreements, ending a program to help Hispanic and Latino families enroll in the 21st Century Scholars Program, removing materials from the Department of Child Services website on racially diverse adoptive families, and eliminating contractors at the Office of Minority Health. The governor's office calls DEI mandates divisive and says they lead to inefficiency. The Indiana Black Legislative Caucus has said Braun's executive order perpetuates false and negative stereotypes and sends a message that the state doesn't care about fairness. Niki, what sort of impact will all of these changes have? Because there's a lot of them.
Remains to be seen. I do want to point out that while one part of the report was 135 pages, if you looked at all of it, it was like 3,800 pages. Yeah. So it was massive. And I think a lot of the pushback against DEI has been on, hiring preferences and preferences for grants or scholarships. And there were certainly those things
some examples, but that was not most of it.
But most of them were just, they were they're taking down minutes of a meeting where diversity was discussed. The meeting
a lot of those, it wasn't even, they were like, by the way, this appears in the meeting minutes. By law, we're not allowed to remove them. It's there. We promise it's not a problem, kind of thing.
And then there are very specific examples. I think I've heard a lot of concern on the health section. Mm-hmm. The fact is, health disparities by race are a real factual thing. And there are some programs that were aimed to, whether it be help black mothers in maternal mortality or other options. Nope, we cannot have those anymore because it treats it. And another one I just want to name really quickly, realtors can't even get a training
on fair housing
redlining,
laws.
On the actual factual history of redlining and how to avoid that in their job. That's not allowed.
Yeah, on how to basically avoid breaking some federal laws. Yeah. The health part in particular is something that the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus and others, when this executive order came out in January, that was a big thing they flagged as being, you're going to hurt the state's ability to address one of its most critical problems.
Yeah, one of its most critical problems. And I want to highlight Vanessa Summers and all of the work that she's been doing for many, many years to help combat this issue. I'm just going to say it. If you are not a straight, white, able-bodied, land-owning male living in the state of Indiana,
I am safe.
Yes. Yeah. So if you're you're safe. If you're not, you're very unsafe in the state of Indiana. And that has been the case from the get-go. So I think this whole situation, all they've done is codify the continued malignment of people who don't fit into that category. I just find it to be just one of the saddest pages in our state's history, frankly.
Reading through this report, it feels like, the legal departments at these agencies and offices had to literally do a control F on their entire agency and go, did the word inclusion come up? Did the word equity come up? One of my favorite examples is meeting minutes from a board referencing a national conference that had a panel that used the word diversity. And they had to flag that for this system. Was this, at best, inartfully done?
Thoroughly.
It was certainly thorough.
I think you talked about having a theme earlier. I think the theme with the Medicaid conversation and this is that the reaction from the public in the 2024 election was we're worn out. We're worn out on putting our pronouns on our email, having to go to the diversity training at work. This goes like your example. So I think most people are just like fed up, and then we saw that in the outcome of the election,
for them,
right?
Smallest violin plays.
They were fed up, and they reacted that way. And
wow.
and in the election, so we missed over here, we're going to miss over here. And that's, I mean, we should understand how disparate populations are disproportionately affected by policy decisions that are made. That should be a conversation that we're allowed to have. And certainly not erase the word diversity from the meeting minutes from last year.
Yeah, I mean,
I just have so much to say, but I'm just going to hold back. I'm going to let Michael O'Brien just keep talking over here.
No, I'm done.
No, I mean, I think a couple things. I think this is definitely a base play, right? This is red meat for the base. It's to say, we did this in the first 6 months, promises made, promises kept, right? But in the meantime, we don't want you to focus on the fact that you're not going to be able to get health care, or your hospital's going to close, or the fact that black women have the worst maternal care rates in probably the world, right? At least based on the Capital Chronicle that I read, article about it, which was very good. I mean, what is happening here is it is cruel, it is capricious, it is trying to turn back history when we can't turn back anymore. We've gone so far. And I think to say that, people are tired of pronouns and they're tired of diversity training. Well, diversity training is really important, especially if you are a privileged white person. It's incredibly important. It's important for all of us to be able to learn from each other, because that's how we get better. But if you're so busy dividing people, then you're focusing on your base and you're not focusing on the fact that you're not bringing down prices, you're not doing any of the other things that you should be doing.
I think it's a misread to go that small, that detailed. Because what I was trying to describe was like, here's what I think thematically drove the outcome of the election. And in part it is Democrats' inability to defend men playing in women's sports, right? It's just take the big examples. And those are the things that drove the outcome.
Men playing in women's sports?
Yeah, transgender women playing in
transgender women playing in women's sports.
Yeah, I just wanted to be...
Sorry, no, I was saying it the way Republicans would say it.
The other thing, though, Michael,
but I do think that drove the outcome, and that's the missing over here.
The other thing, though, I think, too, because the other thing that I think is also kind of disappointing about this is that, we watched Governor Holcomb do a pretty good job of walking down the middle. And these are initiatives that would have gone to an effect while he was governor.
I'd say you'd lean left on this, on what you traditionally think is leaning left. I think the Braun administration would agree.
What I think is disappointing, though, is that he, whether you liked him or you didn't like him, he did a good job at working down the middle, and especially at a time after 2020 where there was such a massive reckoning in this country. And so for Republicans who have sort of walked that walk with him, and they didn't talk a talk, they walked a walk by doing all of this work, I think it'd be really disappointing, because I think in companies and in businesses and organizations, you're having diversity training, you're doing all of these different things. And so that, to me, was disappointing, watching that legacy of Governor Holcomb's dismantled.
Indiana has a new state office dedicated to helping small businesses start and grow, as the Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation launched this week.
The new office is part of a larger effort from Governor Mike Braun. The previous administration faced criticism that its economic development strategy seemed to focus more on luring big businesses to the state rather than helping local companies. Braun says that focus is changing under his administration.
I just want to help them make it through the gauntlet of survival where they don't get much attention presently.
Running the new Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation is Brian Schutt. Schutt co-founded an Indianapolis startup incubator called Refinery 46 and a local HVAC company. Lawmakers put $1 million a year in the new state budget for the office.
10 seconds.
Ebony, is this new office, a good move from the Braun administration?
I'm going to keep my comments short and sweet and follow up on a theme that's been continuing throughout our conversation. I think this would be a success if a bunch of non-white, queer, differently abled people of all different backgrounds were able to adequately benefit from it. Because as we have discussed today, there are so many elements of our state and federal government that are not on their side, that are not working to help make sure that they have a good quality of life. So if them and their families are able to benefit from it, I consider it a success.
A good move, but not a new one, very quickly, Niki.
No, I mean, obviously the state has had entrepreneurship programs for decades. The governor has tried to highlight this one a little more, make it its own separate thing, and they're going to try to push, business creation for many Hoosiers, but not specifically for blacks or women. It's just all Hoosiers.
Yeah, my editor and I were joking this week that I went back because of my filing system with all my stories. I went back and looked at an almost identical story from 2013 about the creation of like a small business office. And I joked with him about just running the same story and changing the names of the quotes. But we didn't do that, of course. And that is Indiana Week in Review for this week. Our panel is Democrat Lara Beck, Republican Mike O'Brien, Ebony Chappel of Free Press Indiana, and Niki Kelly of the Indiana Capital Chronicle. You can find Indiana Week in Review's podcast and episodes at wfyi.org/IWIR or on the PBS app. I'm Brandon Smith of Indiana Public Broadcasting. Join us next time, because a lot can happen in an Indiana week.
The views expressed are solely those of the panelists.
Indiana Week in Review is produced by WFYI in association with Indiana Public Broadcasting Stations.